So our mission in this deep dive is centered around one particular word, decumbiture. What is it? Why do these texts focus on it? And what does it tell us about a very specific historical practice, medical astrology, all through the lens of this one word?
Yeah, okay. So we'll start with the basic definition, what decumbiture is, according to these sources. Then look at the foundational concepts needed to understand its use in a health reading. And then we can get into the really fascinating, detailed interpretive rules the texts lay out.
Okay, let's unpack this. Based on our sources, that Medical Medicus excerpt specifically, what is decumbiture at its core?
Well, the Medical Medicus source presents the decumbiture as the basic type of medical chart used in astrology. Think of it as the standard chart form when you're focusing specifically on health matters.
The starting point, then, for analyzing illness astrologically.
Precisely. And the same source links it really closely to horary astrology. Horary is, traditionally where you cast a chart for the exact moment a specific question is asked. In the case of decumbiture, the chart is cast for the moment the patient is first confined to bed by the illness, or sometimes the moment the question about the illness is actually asked. The question being addressed is essentially, what's the cause of my illness and will I recover?
So it's like a snapshot of the cosmos specifically keyed to the onset of the illness, or maybe the moment someone asks for help.
That's right. And the source does note this particular chart is applicable if the patient is clearly represented by the first house in that specific chart, which is a key technical detail for practitioners.
Got it. So decumbiture is the chart cast for a moment related to the illness, focusing on the patient in the first house. It's the fundamental tool for this kind of astrological health analysis, according to these texts anyway.
Exactly. And to understand how that chart is then read, we really need to look at some of the foundational concepts these historical sources rely on first, because the interpretive rules, they build directly on them.
Okay, let's lay that groundwork. What are some of the core ideas from, classical astrology that are essential for understanding a decumbiture chart?
Okay, one crucial concept mentioned in the sources is the idea of qualities. These are the elemental combinations, like hot and dry, cold and moist, that sort of thing.
Right.
Planets and signs are associated with these qualities, and they were used to understand the nature of diseases and also the patient's inherent constitution, or, their balance.
So like an illness itself is seen as having a hot or cold nature. Is that the idea?
Exactly. The source gives an example, actually, that hot people tend to experience more fevers and higher ones than cold people. And this ties into the classical temperaments: sanguine, choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic.
The four temperaments.
Yeah, which were seen as different human constitutions based on the balance of humors, which in turn were linked to these qualities.
So a patient's fundamental physical makeup is part of the equation right from the start.
It is. Another absolutely vital concept is the idea of planetary dignity and debility. This basically refers to how strong or weak a planet is considered based on the sign and degree it occupies in the chart.
Okay.
So a planet in a sign it rules is strong or dignified. If it's in the sign opposite its ruler, it's seen as weakened or damaged, that's debilitated by detriment. And if it's in a sign where it has no traditional strengths, it might be called peregrine.
So a planet's condition, its dignity or debility, tells you how effectively it can operate in the chart, like how easily it can do its thing.
Precisely. It's really key to understanding the planet's influence. Then, of course, there are the aspects, the specific angular relationships between planets and sensitive points, like house cusps.
Like squares and trines.
Yeah, exactly like a square, which is 90 degrees, a trine at 120, or an opposition at 180 degrees. Some aspects, particularly squares and oppositions, were traditionally seen as hard or challenging.
Got it. Angles between planets signaling different kinds of interactions, some may be flowing, some...
Yeah. Yes. And the concept of rulership is fundamental: which planet rules which sign, and therefore which house. A dispositor is simply the planet that rules the sign another planet is currently in. These connections, these rulership chains, are critical in chart interpretation.
Okay, so we've got qualities, temperaments, planetary condition, dignity or debility aspects between planets, and rulerships linking everything together.
Phew. What houses are specifically important for a medical chart like the decumbiture?
The sources really emphasize three main houses for health readings. The first house, which, like we said, represents the patient's vitality and their physical body.
Okay.
The sixth house is traditionally associated with illness, service, daily routines. So in this context, it signifies the nature of the disease itself.
Right, the illness.
And then the 8th house is the one considered when death is a potential outcome.
Vitality, disease, and the possibility of death map directly onto these 3 houses.
Exactly. And one more thing, the sources mention specific physiological virtues, almost like bodily processes, which are also ruled by planets. Virtues, like bodily functions.
Sort of. Attraction, ruled by Venus, is linked to natural heat and digestion. Retentive, ruled by Saturn, is linked to the spleen and the humor melancholy.
Wow, okay. So planetary influence, in this view, extends not just to general well-being, but even to specific physiological functions.
It really shows the level of detail they were working with. The sources also provide quite extensive lists of body parts and functions associated specifically with the moon, highlighting its perceived influence over the body's fluids and cycles.
That sounds intense. What parts does the moon rule according to these texts?
Well, the list is surprisingly long and detailed. It includes things like the brain, lungs, stomach, menstruation, all excrements, taste, swallowing, and interestingly, the right eye of a woman and the left eye of a man.
Huh. Specific eyes even.
Yeah. And also parts like the neck, the backbone, sinews, and importantly, the womb or matrix in women.
That is a very extensive list. It really shows a belief in the moon's direct physical connection to a huge range of bodily systems and functions.
It really grounds the celestial in the physical body within this whole framework. So now that we have these foundational concepts, qualities, dignity, aspects, rulerships, houses, virtues, moon associations, we can actually dive into how the sources use them to interpret a decumbiture chart for health.
Okay, this is where it gets really intricate, right? The sources provide incredibly specific rules for interpreting the positions and interactions within the chart, all tied to health and prognosis.
They absolutely do. The moon's position, for example, was seen as a really key indicator of how an illness might progress.
Okay, like what? Like if the moon is in a cardinal sign.
Yes, exactly. The source says if the moon is in a cardinal sign that's Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn, signs associated with initiation and action, the disease is expected to move towards a conclusion relatively quickly.
Okay, that seems straightforward enough. But then it gets complicated, with specific placements indicating trouble.
Oh, definitely. For instance, if the moon is debilitated by detriment, meaning it's in a sign where it's considered fundamentally weak in the system, and the chart was cast at night, a nocturnal chart, the source explicitly states there is a danger of death.
Wow. That's a pretty stark interpretation based just on the moon's condition and the time of day.
And it gets even more granular. The source notes specific azimine degrees. These are degrees considered weak or somehow flawed in traditional astrology.
Right.
If the moon falls into azimine degrees, which the source specifically lists as 26 to 29 degrees of Capricorn.
Just those few degrees.
Just those, yes.
Yeah.
And if the illness is acute, meaning sudden and severe, it indicates continued sickness, if not sudden death.
Whoa. So being in just the last few degrees of Capricorn combined with an acute illness and it being the moon, that could be a sign of a really poor outcome.
According to this system, yes. It shows just how specific the degree symbolism could be. And the complexity really deepens when you look at how multiple planets interact.
To be continued on the next video.